Today is Tuesday, November 16th, 2021, and the question before us today is whether white supremacists could get away with murder from Kenosha, Wisconsin to Brunswick, Georgia. And we are also answering the question whether or not a failed president can get away with treason. Let's unpack these questions today. We begin with On the Clock with Georgia Ford.
A jury is currently deliberating in the Rittenhouse trial after the prosecution and defense gave their closing arguments. This after an 18-year-old traveled across state lines following the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, rather. And what we saw from Rittenhouse as he landed in Wisconsin, he ended up partnering up with some business owners trying to protect their businesses, and as a result shot two people who are out protesting and injured another. I want you guys to take a listen to the latest coverage from the trial.
National Guard on alert as Kenosha, Wisconsin braces for a verdict in the homicide trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse faced 6 charges for his actions on the night of August 25, 2020, when he was armed with an AR-15 rifle, including 3 homicide-related charges: first-degree reckless homicide, first-degree intentional homicide, and first-degree attempted intentional homicide. Rittenhouse has pleaded not guilty to all counts. But on Monday, ahead of closing arguments,
the court is confined on that kind of a motion to what's in the complaint and whether it meets the law. I think it ought to have been mighty clear that I had big problems with this statute. I've made no bones about that from the beginning. Is the firearm here now? If the barrel length is less than 60 inches or an overall length less than 26 inches, then I'll deny the motion. If it does not meet those specifications, then this defense motion will be granted.
It is not a short-barreled shotgun or a short-barreled rifle, yes.
Either by barrel or by overall length?
Correct.
All right, and then count 6 is dismissed.
The judge dismissed one of the charges for illegal gun possession, informing the jury.
So that will not be something that you will need to address. You'll need to address only the first 5 counts.
The judge is also permitting the jury to consider lesser offenses for 2 of the felony charges, if the members aren't unanimous on the more serious corresponding charge.
Ben, I want to unpack this a little bit. I know that we are going to listen to the closing arguments from both sides, some of the highlights there, but that's a lot to unpack, knowing that the judge dismissed the gun charges and then is giving the jurors the opportunity to convict on 2 lesser charges if they're not unanimous in the conviction on the higher felony level charges.
Right. Good morning, Georgia. Yeah, this is it can't get any clearer that this is the red carpet being rolled out for white supremacy, for this poster boy, this poster child. Kyle Rittenhouse has become the poster child for all that is this resurgence, this renaissance of white supremacy that we're living through. That said, this judge has made it clear that he is going to do everything within his power to make sure that not only does Kyle get a fair hearing, but that he gets an above fair hearing. I mean, I've never seen images like I've seen of a murder defendant, so casual with the judge in my life. And I think it's just a display of how much they have rolled out the red carpet for white supremacy here.
And for those of you who have not been following along in this trial, let's go ahead and take a listen to the prosecution's closing arguments.
At this point, the crowd is dealing with what they perceive to be an active shooter. The crowd sees the defendant running with a gun. He's lying to them. He still has the gun. He's shot someone. This is provocation to them. This is someone who has committed a criminal act and is putting people in danger. It is entirely reasonable for that crowd to believe at that moment that he is a threat to kill again. The defendant could have made it unequivocally clear what he was doing. He could have stayed at Mr. Rosenbaum's body, helped protect him, helped preserve his life, call 911. He could have dropped the gun. He could have raised his hands in surrender. He could have signaled to this crowd that he did not pose a threat anymore. But everything he does is indicative of someone who is still a threat. And I got to stop here for a moment and highlight the hypocrisy of the defense. Because according to the defense, if someone has a gun, they're a threat. If someone points a gun, they're a threat. There's only one exception to that: the defendant. By their logic, he gets to run around with a gun all night. But, oh, we're not supposed to take him as a threat. He gets to point the gun at everyone. But, oh, we're not supposed to take him as a threat. No, it doesn't work that way. The same set of rules apply to the defendant as everybody else. There's no exception in the law for Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no exception that says, if anyone else has a gun, you're a danger, except for Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no exception in the law that says, if you point your gun at people, oh, that makes you a threat and I can kill you, except for Kyle Rittenhouse. I can do it all night long.
As Mr. Binger said, he brought a gun to a fist fight. And he was too cowardly to use his own fist to fight his way out. He has to start shooting.
So how do we evaluate the defendant's performance as a medic that night? Well, on one hand, he wrapped up an ankle and I think maybe helped somebody who got a cut on their hand. Yay. On the other hand, he killed 2 people, blew off Gage Kurtz's arm, and put 2 more lives in jeopardy. So, you know, when we balance your role as a medic that night, I don't give you any credit.
You know, Ben, when you hear the prosecution there, I think that it was pretty bold of them to point out the defense being hypocrites, but they made their point. And I think that is the type of boldness is going to take if they're going to sway jurors to find him guilty. It's going to take the jurors to see the hypocrisy in the defense's arguments in this case.
That's right. And, you know, people are, we oftentimes dismiss conservatives as, you know, not smart or maybe not the brightest, you know, bulbs in the bunch, but they are able to demonstrate a level of cognitive dissonance, or rather some mental gymnastics that's brilliant here, because in this instance, they are going to clearly see the hypocrisy, but they are going to make an exception. It's special pleading. We see it all the time. They are going to make, and I don't want to make this conclusion on behalf of the jury. We'll see what the jury says, but all around the country, people are making this argument that yes, this is the hypocrisy that they believe should be true, that they should have the right to kill us and that we should have no ability to view them as a threat and to defend ourselves.
And quick, before we move on here, I want you guys to take a listen to the highlights from the defense's arguments.
We don't play fast and loose with the facts, pretending that Mr. Rosenbaum was Citizen A #1 guy. He was a bad man. He was there. He was causing trouble. He was a rioter. And my client had to deal with him that night alone. They want it to be that Kyle was out there doing something improper. Kyle was a 17-year-old kid out there trying to help this community. He was asked to provide help in protecting property at the car sources. It started and he did it. Ladies and gentlemen, other people in this community have shot somebody 7 times and it's been found to be okay. And my client did it 4 times in 3/4 of a second to protect his life from Mr. Rosenbaum. Kyle shot Joseph Rosenbaum to stop a threat to his person. And I'm glad he shot him, because if Joseph Rosenbaum had got that gun, I don't for a minute believe he wouldn't have used it against somebody else. He was irrational and crazy. One with his hands, one with his feet, one with a gun. Hands and feet can cause great bodily harm. Sure, the state's going to get up and say, well, he didn't have great bodily harm, so it doesn't matter. That's not the standard.
So, you know, there you're seeing what the defense laid out in defense of Kyle Rittenhouse. And ultimately, if the jury believes that Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense, he is going to get off if they believe that.
Mhm.
But it's interesting because throughout the trial, we continuously heard this point that how is he acting in self defense when he himself is actually the threat.
That's right. That's right. Well, no, and that's the thing. It's the absurdity of white supremacy. These white men believe that they have the ability to infiltrate in any area that they go into. They have to be respected as the authority there, because that's the only lens through which this defense argument makes any sense. The only way Kyle Rittenhouse can get away with this is if he himself was deputized as an authority to go there and to create the situation that he created, because he was deputized, but he wasn't, Georgia. And this is why this precedent in this case is so dangerous, because there's so many other aspiring Kyle Rittenhouses out there who want to follow in his suit. And if they see that he can get away with it, I fear we're going to have a resurgence of these white supremacists, wannabe vigilantes who are trying to be the next Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, yeah, very dangerous there. Well, we will continue following this. The jury is going to continue deliberating today, and we're expecting that verdict to come down at any time. Ben, I know that you're tracking a story this morning as well.
Yes, Donald Trump, former president, as Brother Mac refers to him as negative 45. There's a tape that has been released of him defending the chant that took place on January 6th, where they chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." Now, as an aside, this is kind of the absurdity of where we are, right? This is the former president talking about the death threat against his vice president, and we're here having to discuss it as if it's regular news. But I digress. Here's the clip of Donald Trump basically explaining away and justifying the chant of "Hang Mike Pence" on January 6th.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his
No,
safety?
I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. No,
You
I
heard
think
those chants. That was terrible. I mean, it was,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry
they're saying hang Mike
because
Pence.
it's common sense. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
How can you? And so, Georgia, there is the second absurdity underneath the first absurdity, right? The reason we're discussing it is the president of the United States is justifying the threat against his colleague, the
And
vice
then
president.
also
He's justifying it.
justifying the big lie.
Exactly, the big lie at the same time. So there we have it. We're dealing with a lot at one time across this country, and I think that just puts a fine point as to how far this country goes on behalf of mediocre white men like Donald Trump.
Well, and I'm reminded of the way that violence and so-called white supremacy go hand in hand.
That's right.
Here we're hearing from Trump the justification for people saying, "Hang Mike Pence," just as we concluded a conversation about Kyle Rittenhouse, who felt like he had the authority to go to kill two people and injure another.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so the level of violence that we see from people who have so much hatred in their heart, that I think is really the true danger, and the thing that's most jeopardizing democracy at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the critical thing. We're allowing um these are not the best, or rather, if this is the best that white supremacy can do, I think it's time for white supremacy to stand down. If Donald Trump is the apex, right? If Kyle Rittenhouse is your hero, then I think that you all should hang your heads in shame, because these people are really discussing this in context of our whole democracy. We're talking about trading our entire democracy for someone as mediocre as Donald Trump. That's the absurdity of the moment.
Mm, 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 mm. Well, we will see when he runs for president again.
in 2024, right?
We
And
will
and
see.
you know what? To be honest with you, Georgia, to be honest with you, Democrats aren't doing us any favors here. Like, with the polling, with the kind, I know, we could discuss. We're going to discuss later on in the show, the infrastructure bill that was signed into law yesterday, which is a decent first step, but it really comes short in terms of what the people are looking for. And I'm afraid that the Democrats might be giving Donald Trump everything he needs to win in 2024 or have a successful run in 2024, which is a terrifying notion.
The true test of the state of America will be whether or
Mhm.
not we reelect Donald Trump.
Well, it's a terrifying notion.
My. Well, I want to turn now to Georgia, where the trial is currently underway for the killers of Ahmaud Arbery. Take a look at a recap from coverage.
Formally moved for a mistrial under the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, which are parallel provisions of the Constitution of the state of Georgia. We contend that the atmosphere of the trial, inside and outside the courtroom, at this point, has deprived Mr. Bryan of his right to a fair trial. I understand that co-counsel vehemently disagree on some aspects of that motion, and if they don't want to join, that's their business. But I represent Mr. Bryan, and my concern, Your Honor, notwithstanding what in my observation would be extraordinary efforts on the part of the court to avoid anything that would interfere with the right of these defendants to a fair trial. At the same time, in extraordinary cases like this, additional steps have to be taken. We have not secured the front of this courthouse. The Transformative Justice Coalition still flies their banner virtually every day outside in what should be protected grounds. Your Honor, we have had several instances during jury selection of nonverbal communications between the victim's family and jurors, or from juror to the victim's family. We've had several emotional outbursts during the trial of this case, notwithstanding the substantial efforts of the court to ensure that they don't take place. And we have had civil rights icons sitting in here in what the civil rights community contends is a quote-unquote test case for civil rights in the United States.
These are all very, very separate issues, neither which independently or even together at the same time require manifest necessity for a mistrial. We ask that you deny that mistrial.
Georgia, I love the succinctness with which she just unraveled his pitiful argument.
Yeah, I mean, she said neither independently nor collectively do any of those arguments merit a mistrial. But that is what we'll see from defense attorneys. We saw it in the Derek Chauvin trial. The defense, at any opportunity, would ask for a mistrial, ask for everything to just be thrown out. And, in this case, it's shocking that it is 2021 and we're hearing defense using the presence of pastors, civil
That's
rights
right.
icons, the
That's right.
presence of them being a reason for a mistrial. I don't quite, while I, as a journalist, try to understand both sides so that at least I can report on them, I can't quite wrap my mind around the logic there. What is it about the presence of a pastor, a Black pastor specifically, that merits a mistrial?
Well, it's split up into two different cases, but if you look at both the Rittenhouse case and this Arbery case, essentially what they're saying is the very presence of a Black peacemaker should be viewed as a threat, while the presence of a white man with a gun should not be viewed as a threat, and the authority should be given to that white kid or white man with a gun, because if he gets off in the Rittenhouse case, that's what this system is saying to us, all while making the argument that someone like Jesse Jackson is the real threat and should, constitute a mistrial. The absurdity of it all.
I thought that having a pastor around was a good thing. And,
Right.
there has been some organizing that's been happening. I received a press release yesterday from the National Action Network, which is the network of uh, uh, Al Sharpton. And they are organizing for, I believe, more than 100 Black pastors to
That's
take a
right.
stand outside of the
Yeah.
courthouse. And so, if they're asking for a mistrial just based on the presence of one, I wonder what's going to happen when they walk outside and there's 100.
Well, I'm going to be there and bring you the reaction live because I I knew when I heard it that the response was going to be probably thousands of Black pastors. I want to see it. So there's a good chance we'll be there on this Thursday.
Man, a little prayer ain't never hurt nobody.
Unless you're a devil.
Well, rebuke Satan there.
Oh Lord. You
Ben,
about to walk
I
me into
do.
some trouble here, Georgia.
I know, right? And good thing Anthony's not here.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh my goodness. Yes.
he
Yes.
might be flying down there to participate, but what the outcomes of these trials will ultimately determine is the way in which Black lives are valued in a post George Floyd society. And
That's
I
right.
also believe that whether or not Rittenhouse is held accountable will send a message, as you were saying
Oh yeah.
earlier, to other individuals on how bold and violent they can be in
That's
their
right.
approaches
That's
when
right.
they're responding to protests for Black lives.
That's right. And here's one last thing that I would say about it is people who want to make the distinction and say, oh, well, Rittenhouse's victims were not Black, therefore it can't possibly be white supremacy. You have to understand what drove that little devil to cross state lines was in reaction to Black life being protested for, like people standing up for Black lives. That's why he showed up. And I think that it might just be a disappointing detail in the grand total of their white supremacy that they killed 2 white people and not Black people. But that didn't stop him. Here we are. And the real question is, like you said, Georgia, at the end of the day, what is the value of Black life and the life of those who stand up on behalf of Black lives?
Yeah, and that ideology is very deep rooted in the evolution of white supremacy and the
Mm,
attack on Black life. I mean, when you go back to white folks who were assisting in slaves escaping from slavery, when you go
that's right.
back in the 50s and 60s, and you look at folks who were in interracial relationships, what were those white people called?
Hmm.
They had a very special name for those kind of white people. They called them
Those
N
race
lovers.
traders. Mm,
Oh,
hmm.
well,
Well, the
and
other
so
one too.
it
Yeah.
evolves, right?
Mm,
And so there has always not only been an attack on Black life, but there has also been an attack on people who support and love and will help Black people. We've
mm,
seen that, and that it has evolved in the way in which it looks and how it shows up. But in the 21st century, it's Kyle Rittenhouse showing up to Kenosha, Wisconsin with a gun and killing 2 people, 2 allies, two individuals who are saying that police should not be out here shooting Black men in the way in which
that's
we
right.
saw that happen to Jacob Blake.
Yeah. And please excuse me, I'm having a little coughing fit over here, but I'm reminded of what Brother Mac would say here as a point of history, right? That white supremacy has never had an issue with killing white people. Never has. Or even, in whatever context, it will take collateral damage on behalf of their mission. And we've seen it through history. So when you were saying people who have been killed while they were protesting for Black lives, I'm thinking of the murders of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. The story that most people know underneath the movie Mississippi Burning. I think it's one of the best examples in the minds of a lot of Black people of a certain age of how willing white supremacy is to kill white people in order to accomplish their agenda.
Absolutely. Well, I know we are on the clock. What can people expect coming up in the next hour?
Georgia, as we get ready to talk about some of these issues that are coming across the country in the next segment, January 6th is still on question. And Steve Bannon has now surrendered himself as it pertains to being subpoenaed by the select committee. So we're going to unpack that. But he did not come in quietly. He had a lot to say for the cameras. So we're going to talk about everything that Steve Bannon is doing, turning himself in after being subpoenaed by the select committee.
Keep it here for that and more on The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Good morning, good people. Y'all know who it is. You know the voice, you know the sound. It's your boy, James Bubba Williams is in the building. DJ Exclusive is on. Good morning.